So I've been working on making a copy of The Martian for Andy Weir, and I want to add something extra to this Mars landscape on the cover. When I spoke to him, he said something that gave me an idea.
I do like your rollers that do the patterns and stuff like that.
So what if I can use a brass wheel tool to make rover tracks going across the covers? That'd be pretty cool. There's only one problem with that though. In my entire collection of vintage rolls, I don't have one that's Mars rover tracks. Hard to believe, I know. Anyway, I guess I'll just have to make one for myself. And in true Mark Watney fashion, I'm going to make it out of whatever I have lying around the shop. For any of you machinists out there watching, I'll just say that I'm not one of you, and I'm going to be misusing tools in creative ways in this video, so consider yourself warned. This piece of 1/8 inch thick brass flatstock should be perfect. My plan is to make some sort of dual-wheeled roller, so I'll need 2 circle blanks. To get started, I'll put on some layout fluid and scribe in a couple of circles. This stock is a bit more than 1 inch wide, but the thickness tapers off a bit at the edges, so I'll leave some room there. The exact diameter isn't critical, but the thickness will determine the width of the tracks, so I want that to be consistent. I started by cutting out the circle with a fret saw and a coarse blade, but I gave up on that pretty quick. I need something that's less finesse and more aggressive. Pretty rough, it's true, but I was going to need to file these down to the layout lines anyway, so I'm okay with that. Not sure why I switched to the blue vise. I think it was probably so I could better see the scribe lines. Look at old Red there, feeling all left out. Don't worry, buddy. I've still got lots of work for you. Those are looking not too bad, but they still need truing up. I don't need NASA-level precision for these, but they've got to at least be round. Of course, this would all be a breeze if I had a full arsenal of tools like a CNC water jet, metal lathe, milling machine, etc., etc. Sponsors, take note. Anyone laughing is welcome to send any unwanted tools to 4 Keys Workshop. Postage paid, please. Thank you very much. Anyway, I don't have any of those, so I'll content myself with what I've got, which is mostly woodworking stuff. My plan is to mount both blanks onto a shop-made mandrel, which I can then pop into my old wood lathe to turn them to size. As you can see from the quality of my freehand filing work, they're going to need it. Well, that is awful, even by wood turning standards. So, I'll bring in the dial gauge to get it as concentric as I can. That's about as good as it's going to get, so it'll have to do. Lacking any sort of a tool holder, or even a tool for that matter, I'm just going to nibble these down with a coarse file. It took a while, but I'm happy with the final result. I'll worry about tidying up the surface finish later. Okay, 2 brass discs sorted. Now it's time to get down to the actual business of making the track patterns on them. I need to make sure that the track pattern matches up all the way around the perimeter, so I need to lay out some reference marks. For that, I'll use this dumbed-down version of ClickSpring's layout jig. It's got a pivot point in the center, and I've laid out some marks in intervals around the perimeter. My wheel goes on a pin in the middle, but rather than file away half of the pin like ClickSpring did, I put a notch in this bit of angle brass instead to use as my straight edge. Then I just align the guide from the pin to the marks on the outside and scribe my lines all the way around. I do need a way to hold the disc in place though, so I'll do that with a little spritz of spray adhesive on the board. It only needs to hold for a minute after all. It's not too bad. I'd say that's good enough for my purposes. To make those marks visible on the business side of the wheels, I'll just make a few notches with a fine file. Doing this will make my life a lot easier when it gets to cutting the track patterns. I should have brushed these with layout fluid while they were still on the mandrel, but that would have kept my hands clean. Who wants that? Anyway, let me show you my little tread cutting jig. It's just a couple of blocks of hardwood which I've notched and added an alignment pin. The blank sits on there and then gets held between the wooden jaws. The blank stands a bit proud of the top so I can saw in the treads, and I'll use the notches in the wood as a guide. With my layout marks lined up with the saw guide, I can cut in an angled tread. The depth of the cut isn't critical, so I just use the thickness of the saw blade as my gauge. There, that's one down. Just 127 more to go. My jig isn't the most user-friendly. It tends to bind up every time that I clamp down on it, but it gets the job done. It would want some redesigning if this was for a production run, but as this is a one-off job, I'll make do. You might notice that I'm making all right-hand cuts on this blank, and that's because the other one will be a mirror image. That's all 16 of the initial treads cut for this one, and they're looking pretty good. I've still got more to do, but I'll get the other wheel up to this stage first. Somehow I think NASA would have the sense to put universal, identical wheels on an actual Mars mission rover, but I'm an artist, not an engineer, and I rather like the look of the mirrored symmetry. Anyway, now I need to cut all the other treads in between my initial ones. Adding 3 saw curves between each of those will make for a nice consistent tread pattern. To do that, I'll just lay out some marks by eye. No need for fiddly measurements. I start by lightly sawing those in to check the spacing, and then I'll cut all 3 treads to depth. I'll try to keep my cuts as accurate as I can, but at this scale, any inconsistencies shouldn't be noticeable in the final impressions. And you can see I'm using the jig just to hold the piece here, as it's easier to line my cuts up by eye than to adjust the workpiece for every cut. After a while I kind of got into a rhythm, and I found it was easier to just mark the middle cut, and then the other 2 I would do by eye. Well, they wouldn't quite cut it if they were clock gears, but for my purposes, I think those will do. The pattern's more or less consistent around the entire perimeter, which means that they'll leave an even track on the leather. Now I just need to clean them up and then figure out how I'm going to mount them. A quick scrub on a file takes care of the layout fluid and any scribe marks. For the sides, no further finishing is needed. To fine-tune the tread, I'll get the wheel onto a bolt and then I'll chuck it up into a cordless drill. I'm not doing any real heavy stock removal or reshaping here, so the lathe isn't required. I just need to spin it up enough to be able to refine the surface. Using a fine file, I'll shape the edge to smooth out any coarser texture and give the wheel a slightly rounded profile, which will be better for impressing it into the leather. Alright, I'm going to call those done. Now I just need to figure out how to use them. A traditional bookbinder's wheel has this distinctive curved neck and a long handle. I thought about just mounting my little wheels onto one of my existing ones, but they're all way too big, so what to do? I happen to have this beautiful piece of brass, which I think was a leg of some kind, and maybe I could cut it down and modify it to make a nice shiny new mount for my wheels. It's kind of the right shape and it's kind of the right size, but it's not quite right for the dual-wheeled system that I'm going for. So instead, I'm going to go with this decidedly nasty old bit of square steel tubing from the bottom of my scrap box. It's got this plastic covering and more than a bit of rust, but still, I think I can make it work. Maybe I can mount the wheels on the outside like this, like some sort of janky Pinewood derby car. They also fit on the inside, so that's a possibility too. First though, I need to clean this thing up. I think I'll make this less rusty bit the business end. I've got enough room here that I think I can make some curved mounting brackets. The wheels will get mounted off-center here, which will give room for those curved arms. A washer will make a handy guide for laying out the finials, but first, more layout fluid. The old tool may be too big for my new wheels, but I can still use it to lay out the curved arms. I'm not sure why, but in use this curved setup gives more control and pressure when you use the tool. If nothing else, it'll help to dress up this old hunk of steel. I'll drill out the mounting holes together while the bar is still a solid piece. Then I can break out the hacksaw again to do some waste removal. I'm left with this long straight section that I can't get at with the saw, so I have to use the Mark Watney approved method of drilling a long series of holes in order to cut a straight line. That's followed up, of course, with hitting it with a hammer. Well, that looks awful. I need to bend it back into shape a bit, I think. Then a bit of filing to clean up those alligator teeth. And by a bit, I meant a lot. A lot of filing. Did I mention you can send me power tools? All the tools. Just hit me up. Okay, it's not the prettiest, but I'm at the point where I can do a rough fit up to see if this thing will even work. I'll use a couple of washers and this small bushing as a spacer for the time being. Well, it holds the wheels and they turn, so it's looking like it might work. Even so, I think I should take it out to the bindery to give it a proof of concept test. I swapped out that spacer and threw in a couple of nuts on there to hold everything in place. So the next thing I need to do is heat it up and see if it still spins. I'm going to call that a success. I still need to dial in the temperature as well as how I prep the leather, but those look like vehicle tracks to me. I'll have a few more goes for good measure though. Okay, that's totally going to work. Now I just need to take it back down to the shop for a few final tweaks. That includes refining the shape of the holder so it doesn't look quite so janky. Finally, I need to fine-tune the wheel spacing to match the little mini Rover that I'm making to go with it. I need to spread out the wheels by about 2 millimeters, so I need to find a different spacer than this old nut. While I'm at it, I'll also swap out the steel fittings for brass. These brass bits are mostly plumbing parts, I think. This nut is just the perfect size for a spacer, though it's a bit small in diameter. To fix that, I'll add this brass sleeve to better support the wheels and keep them from wobbling. I'll put those together for a test fit, and I quite like the look of all the brass together. More importantly though, the wheels are now perfectly spaced to match the Rover. So, final assembly time. I've added a couple of small washers to hold the wheel assembly between the support arms, as well as a little knurled nut to hold it all together. It's a bit fiddly to get everything in place, but I get there eventually. That nut gets snugged down just enough to hold it all together. If it's too tight, the wheels will bind. And if it happens to come loose a bit while it's in use, then it's no trouble to give it a turn to tighten it back. Most of my vintage wheels are pretty loose as well, so I think it may actually be by design. Anyway, I think this tool is ready to go. Okay, here goes nothing. And done. Stopping right there. You'll find out why in my other video. That worked really well though. Alright, that was a fun project. I hope you liked following along. If you haven't yet, check out the series that inspired this tool, Project Hail Andy, over on my main channel. Anyway, until next time, I'm Dennis. Take it easy.